Create and execute Windows command files arrays. This video shows how to create and use indexed variables, also known as arrays, in batch files. The video shows how to use variables as indices. Numerous examples are given to show what syntax does work and what syntax doesn't work. To copy the code described in this video so you can execute it yourself, click the script web page link below this video or type this address into your browser. Open the page, then copy the code lines into an empty .bat file. The procedure to do that was shown in early videos in this series. Follow the syntax exactly. The command line processor is very particular. You must use delayed expansion, I'm abbreviating it DE, for indexed variables when the indices are variables. You are watching a Tom's Tech Notes video. If you like this video, please wait until you are finished watching it, then click my name, Thomas Wallace, to visit my channel page. A welcome video will play to describe my other videos. We'll do a detailed code walkthrough showing the results as we go. There is some repetition. Syntax do's and don'ts will be pointed out. I've enabled delayed expansion at the beginning. And of course, where you don't need to use it, you don't need to use the exclamation points. The first code group initializes three variables in an array called x. And it initializes the first variable in the array, which has a 0 index, then the third variable in the array, which is index 2, and then uses index 3. I use the form of the for command that will let you list the values you want for the for loop variable, and I go through the same as the indexes I set. What this does, it starts by echoing each one it's about to use. What it does is it sets %%i, the loop variable, to 0, goes through the loop, goes to 2, goes through the loop, and 3, and goes through the loop. So each time it goes through the loop, it'll echo the x variable that has that index. And notice I do use delayed expansion. Then I set another variable with using the same subscripts, so it'll be an array also, to the value that's in the x array squared. So I multiply the value by itself, I put it in the y array. Then I echo the y array just to check that everything's working right. So let's look at the code. And I do have echo on because this code's very finicky and you need to know exactly why things work and why things don't work. So there's the instruction. It doesn't produce any output. Likewise, the next two. Now here's the for loop. It shows the for loop with initial substitutions, and really nothing's changed. Then it shows the first pass with the substitutions before executing it. And it, as we see, it shows the 0 being substituted for the I on the first pass. And again, that's because the for loop starts with 0, goes 2, goes 4, the variable. So here's the first pass about to be executed, hasn't been executed. So it expands it all. So you can see what it's going to do. It's going to set, it echoes the x variable, and it does that here. Then it sets the y variable to the expanded value of x0, but it hasn't expanded it yet because it hasn't executed it. And likewise, times the x variable. So it'll set y to x squared. It shows the substitution. Now, to prove that it actually worked, we'll do that after this loop. So when it goes through the loop, the only output is the x value for each pass through the loop. And you see that here. It goes through it with a 10, a 20, and a 30. Then it finishes the loop. It comes down here and it echoes the y value, index 0, 2, and 3. Notice I didn't have to use the exclamation points here because I have a constant index. So it worked fine. It gave me a 100, 400, 900, which is the square of these three numbers. Remember though, you don't need the exclamation points if it's a constant index and it's not in a loop or block. So it goes down to here. This format will not work because it has percents inside the bracket for the index. That's the loop variable. But it also has percents outside. It turns out the processor has no idea how to process this. So let's see what it shows. There's the 4 instructions. It says do 0, 2, and 3, do the echo and a %z. But notice it says it's going to echo %z. But the instruction itself has this after the %z. The processor could not figure out what to do with this because it's got percents inside the bracket and it's got percents outside the bracket. So it has no idea what to do, so it just says, oh, the heck with it, and it doesn't do anything. So it shows this 4 instruction expanded with this gone. So what's going to happen when it executes, of course, is it's just going to print out the loop variable, which is going 0, 2, 3, and that's what it does, 0, 2, 3. Now the next one, I use the proper syntax. And you really got to memorize this or look back at the examples. There's percents inside the bracket. That means you can't use them outside, so you have to use exclamation point. You'd have to do this even if it was outside a loop. So this one's fine. Now I'm using exclamation point and exclamation point for those two variables. And again, it's going to do the 0, 2, and 3 indexes in those two arrays. And let's see what happens there. First of all, there's the expansion for the first pass, and it shows it's going to do x0 and y0. It hasn't expanded them yet because it hasn't executed it. Then it executes it, and sure enough, 0, 10, 100. That's the first item. That's x, and then, of course, that's x squared as the first value in the y array. And then here's the second pass, and it shows the substitution. It shows what's going to be used. Hasn't substituted it until it actually executes it. Remember, that's how delayed expansion works. And sure enough, second index, 20, 400, that's the 20, and then 20 squared, 400, and then third, and so forth. So remember, you've got to use the delayed expansion and use the exclamation points, even though you would think that you wouldn't have to. You really do have to. Let's look at the next one. It does the same loop. I just broke it out into a block. So I have the do and then I have the parentheses and closing instructions. And I want to show you some things in this as we go through. So just to make sure we really know what we're doing, I'm going to look at the item from the array, the Y array. I'm going to stick it in AA, and this syntax looks fine. Then I'm going to echo it. So this is AA with the delayed expansion. AA with that delayed expansion, and sure enough, it says AA with the delayed expansion is this. This is the for instruction itself expanded. Now here's the first pass expanded before it's executed. So it shows what's getting substituted in. Now here's what actually comes out when you execute the block. And what it does, again, it echoes the loop index and the Y value. That's what it does, 100. That's the first, that's the 0 index in the Y array. It's 100. Then I try setting AA with the good syntax. Exclamation points outside, parentheses inside. So I'm going to set AA and then I'm going to echo AA. So let's see what happens. We set AA with the delayed expansion, and sure enough, it echoes 100. It echoes the correct value. Then we tried it with the wrong syntax. Again, we went back and we forgot we had to use the exclamation point, so it's all percent signs. Doesn't work. So when it echoes, when it sets up the instruction, it doesn't have anything that it's setting into AA. And then when it actually executes the instruction, it doesn't set anything into AA other than empty. And then it echoes it, AA with percent, and sure enough, doesn't have anything in it. Now here we use the syntax with the percent on the outside, but we can do that because it's a constant subscript or index. So this does work. It works because we set y outside the block we're in, and we don't have a variable inside the bracket as the subscript or the array index. So this format works because this is a constant, not a variable. So we look at AA with constant index, and we look at what I actually echoed, and sure enough, it's the correct value, the third square in the Y array, which is 900. So the syntax is tricky. You've got to follow it. Let's go on down in the code. We set index to 3, and these two lines don't work. Here's set index to 3, and it doesn't produce any output. And then here's echo without the delayed expansion. We echoed without the delayed expansion, and again, we have that bad syntax. We have the variable inside, so we needed the parentheses, but x itself is a variable array, so we needed % there, but that format does not work. So when you execute without the DE, it can't process this syntax correctly. So this whole thing wound up looking like IX. So without DE, again, just shows the letters IX instead of the contents of the array. Now let's try echo % first. This is the wrong syntax. The exclamation point has to be outside, the % has to be inside. So this is bad syntax also. Let's see what that does. % first didn't echo anything. It couldn't figure out what to do with this at all, so I just ignored it. Now, here's the proper syntax. Echo with DE, start with the exclamation point on the array name, and inside where this index is, use the % sign around the variable. Echo with DE, sure enough, that's the correct value. So you've got to keep it straight. If you've got a variable index for a variable array, you've got to have exclamation points around the whole thing and % signs around the index, and the index goes inside of the brackets. Now let's do a more complicated example. Much more complicated example showing again what you can do and what you can't do. I have an echo there to give me a blank line. Then we set IX to 0. Then we do a for loop to read a file. And we did that in previous videos, but this is the example, that's what we're doing also. So /f reads a file. And we've discussed all this before, but it's going to read 3 tokens from the file with a common delimiter, and it's going to use %I. So first of all, I echo the line it just read. It's going to go through the loop as many times as there are lines in the file, reading 3 values from each line. So the first line it read, it'll do the echo of the 3 tokens. First 3 tokens are here. Now is the, and that's correct contents of my text file that I'm testing. Remember, there's no output, visible output here. It's putting it in an array, and we can verify that after we get out of the array and we look at the actual array. So all you're going to see on the output is the echo. So the first set of variables, x, y, and z, is going to have the first, second, and third values read from the line. So it's going to have now is the from the first line. It's going to have 10, 20, 30 in the second line. It's going to have these 3 things in the third line, and it's going to have these 3 things in the fourth line. And notice this line looks a little funny because I have spaces in the middle of a text string in the file, and it's fine. It's using common delimiters. And then we echoed it, and sure enough, it matches what it should with a common delimiter. We're going to start looking at the contents once I press the space again, just to make sure. Remember, what we did is we put each line of the file into variables x, y, and z, because each line has only 3 tokens on it. We're going to use the loop to echo, and we're going to use the loop type where you can specify the start, the increment, and the last value. And remember, up here we kept I didn't mention it when we went through the loop, IX is a record counter. We started at 0, we increment it for each record. It's also the index in the arrays. So it's the record count and it's the index in the arrays. When you exit the loop, IX will be the number of records in the array. So if we then do this for, starting with 1, incrementing by 1, and stopping at IX, that's the number of records in the file and in the array. We're going to echo, and then we're using, by the way, Q, because we don't want to confuse the Q and the X. I tend to use X or I or whatever, but I use Q. So we're going to use Q, and we're going to echo X1, Y1, Z1. Then we're going to increment by 1 and do 2, 2, 2. So let's see if that's correct. There's the for loop. There's the first pass expanded, showing that it's x1, y1, z1, and there it is now, is the. That's the correct line from the array, not from the file. This is how you would do it if you want to really process a text file. You would put it in an array, and then you can write your code to process the array elements. So here's the second one. 10, 20, 30 is correct. That's correct, and that's correct. So what we did is we read the contents of the text file. We stored it in a set of arrays for each item in the lines, and then we can process those pieces from the arrays, not from the file. So you would do that, for instance, if you want to read in a file, then you want to look for certain data and change it in the file. So what you have to do is change it in the array and then output the array to a new version of the file. If you wanted to sort a file, and we will do that in subsequent videos. If you want to sort a file, that's the same way you would do it. You would read it into the arrays, you'd sort the arrays, and then you'd output the sorted file from the arrays. So that's it. And everything works. You just have to remember, I can't overemphasize this, you have to remember when you have to use delayed expansion, such as this example here. If you have a variable index, it'll either be a loop variable or a regular variable, and it'll have some percent signs. If it's a loop variable, it'll be percent in the variable name. If it's an ordinary variable, it'll have percent around the variable name. If you have that as an index, you put that in the brackets, but then the variable that you're indexing has to be enclosed in exclamation points. That will cause you a lot of trouble if you don't get that syntax right. Some of these syntax errors, as you saw in some of my examples, will let the code proceed. It just won't give you anything where you expected to have some letters. Some of the syntax errors will kill the processor and will just make your output file vanish. So those are harder to find. And again, subsequent videos, we're going to develop a real file management system where you can search the file for a particular record, and then you can maybe change that record, or you could return it to the caller if you made it into a function. Or you could actually change it and then rewrite the file with that record changed. Thanks for watching my video. If you like this video, please click my name, Thomas Wallace, to visit my channel page to watch my other videos.